Diaguib Galera Cordia August Thofoilse Road. Welcome to Be My Guest with me, Mary Honan, on Lear Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary, Clare's Wish Foundation, Limerick, and Deal Animal Rescue, West Limerick. My very special guest today is an extraordinary woman with an extraordinary story. In 2013, a United Nations whistleblower first began accusing the organization's Human Rights Office in Switzerland of providing the communist Chinese government with the names of activists critical of Beijing, particularly Uyghur Muslims, Tibetans, and Hong Kongers. Emma Reilly is that woman. She's an Irish woman and a lawyer working for the United Nations, and she is my guest on Be My Guest today to talk about her ongoing efforts to draw attention to these actions. She is particularly interested in the Irish government playing an active role in both bringing those to justice who continue to give the names of dissidents, but fundamentally to ensure it ceases now and that no more people are put in danger by this practice. Emma also has emails and recordings of meetings in which the UN has privately admitted they do this in order to placate communist China, though publicly they claim this practice has ceased. I'd like you all to join me in welcoming this courageous woman, Emma Reilly, to be my guest. Hello, Emma. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing? Thank you for having me.
It's my absolute honor. It's a very serious accusation that you're making against the High Commission for Human Rights in the United Nations. Tell me a little bit to start, I suppose, Emma, about yourself. You were born in Belfast.
Yeah, exactly. I was born in Belfast and I was always really interested in human rights, but initially didn't really see it as a career. So I actually studied maths at university, and then I moved to Hong Kong, and it was there that I did a distance learning law degree, and I actually worked directly in Hong Kong with a lot of Chinese dissidents. Then I sort of lived in about 14 different countries in the next 11 years, just learning languages, working with NGOs, working really with grassroots organizations, trying to improve human rights situations on the ground. And then in 2012, just before I joined the UN, I was actually regional director of an NGO in North Africa during the Arab Spring, which was incredibly interesting. And
wow.
We worked a lot with local youth groups, really the people who had been at the basis of the revolution in Tunisia, trying to make sure that they weren't excluded from all of the subsequent processes, really working on kind of what does democracy look like at local levels? How do you improve situations? How do you make sure that human rights aren't sort of theoretical constructs, but something that's really alive in people's daily lives? And how do you move on from countries where there has been torture and abuse of people based on religion, based on other issues? And then I got a call from the UN saying that I was on a roster of sort of pre-approved people to work there, saying that they wanted me to come work there, and it was in the Human Rights Council branch, so supporting the intergovernmental body. And so I said,
it's safe to say it was you probably were just over the moon to work with the United Nations.
One of the things about human rights work on the ground is I was spending a lot of my time effectively telling the UN people what we needed them to say to the government. And I sort of thought, I can cut out the middleman here and be the one who is directly engaging with the diplomats, with the various ministers, and really, there is still a lot of opportunity to affect change. And, coming with the label of United Nations Human Rights Officer, people do listen.
They do, and given your the revelations of what you have actually brought out, it beggars belief to think that an organization that one puts so much faith in, as a last resort, you hear people saying, well, I'm going to go to the human rights, I'm going to go to the United Nations Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg to fight this case. And you think, these people are on your side. These people are the barrier between you and danger, or you and injustice. And, you have revealed that in actual fact, and your boss was very much involved in this, in giving the Chinese the names of Uyghur dissidents, and also, it has to be said, Tibetans and Hong Kongers, going there specifically to speak out about the repression of the Chinese government, thinking that they were going there in utter safety. But you maintain, and you say you have the evidence, the recorded evidence, and you have the documentary evidence that what you're saying is true, which is why they're probably still paying you.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I had been lying about this since 2013, I think the UN would have found a good way of getting rid of me by now. But yeah, I mean, I was shocked. It was really, I'd been there about a year and, doing this very bureaucratic work of sort of supporting the intergovernmental body. And then I got a role within that department. I was moved across to supporting the participation of civil society. So all of the NGOs, all of the people basically that I used to work with that were then wanting to come to the UN. And as you said, I mean, particularly in regions where there isn't a sort of the equivalent of a European Court of Human Rights, the UN's really the last resort. It's when you have no court to which to take your case, where you have nowhere else to be heard. The Human Rights Council is really a place where, there are Chinese diplomats in the room, and it's the only place where they can effectively be made to listen to civil society, because that doesn't happen in China. And obviously they don't find that a very comfortable position to be in as Chinese diplomats. So, yes. They got this email from them saying, can you do us a favor and let us know if any of these people are coming? And getting emails like that from a delegation isn't that unusual. A lot of people want to know who's coming. Standard response, no, we're not telling you, goodbye, thank you. And, you phrase it diplomatically. But for China, my boss said, well, we've got to make an exception here. And I mean, I was just shocked. So I immediately started reporting this all the way up the system to try to stop it happening. Of course.
Sorry, Emma, you started reporting it in 2013.
Yeah, exactly.
And your boss was very much involved in this. And it has to be said that on the 5th of March, 2021, a spokesman for the Secretary General Gutierrez, he's Stefan Dujarric. Yeah. He claimed that the United Nations office handed names, the claims that they handed names to the Chinese are untrue. And that, as he says, at no time has any activist been placed at risk, and that from 2015 they stopped giving or confirming. Now that's a very interesting phrase, confirming, because it suggests that the Chinese gave them a list of people. Are they going to be here? Are they going to be here? Are these people going to be attending? And they confirmed or denied, no, this person isn't, this person is, this person is.
Yeah, I mean, they were giving China information China didn't have. But what's very interesting about that 7th or 5th of March statement by Dujarric is that if you actually look on the 26th of February, when he was asked the same question, he said at no point have they ever handed over any names at all.
Yeah, and even Rupert Colville, spokesman for the UN Commissioner for Human Rights, said in January 13th that it was a past practice, and that your claims are completely false, and that they relate to discontinued historical practices. Well, and that they've taken complete and utter care that the OHCHR wouldn't endanger any human rights activists whatsoever, and that they're not aware of any evidence from despite the fact that you've been reporting since 2013, they're not aware of any people being put in danger.
Well, the people who were put in danger testified before the UN's internal court on my behalf against the UN.
That's right, Dalcanisa.
Exactly. And I mean, I even posted online, he gave me permission to post his witness statement. He says in that when China is made aware that he's going to be attending meetings, the Chinese police go to his family home. His family is made to call him to tell him not to go. His brother was arrested. His entire family has been placed in concentration camps, and his mother died.
And he died in prison.
No, Dolkanis isn't a German citizen, so he's actually out of there. And that's the case with a lot of these people. A lot of these people whose names are handed over, they're outside China. So they believe that they're in relative safety and going to the Human Rights Council. What they don't expect to happen is that several weeks before they go, their families in China get Chinese police turning up at their homes, threatening them, telling them not to go. And I mean, some of these stories are truly horrific. The UN, basically, they keep telling different stories. So the thing that we can be absolutely certain about is the UN is lying. When I first reported this in 2013, and even their news story says it was definitely happening in 2013.
Yeah.
I reported it to the European Union, and the European Union had a meeting of all of the member states, and they called in my boss, a guy called Eric Tistounet. And I got a report back from the Irish delegation and from several other delegations that were at that meeting. And he just outright denied that this was happening. So that's in September 2013. He has a meeting with the European Union and he says, I'm a liar, it's not happening. Now, according to the UN's current position, after I reported it, it happened at least 9 more times before they stopped, if they stopped. If they stopped in 2015, why did they put out a press release in 2017 saying it was continuing? And why did they say in court in 2019 that it was continuing? Yeah. So this story of it stopping in 2015, I know why they chose 2015. It's because the person that took over my role, who was the last one that I sort of had good contact with and who would tell me what was happening, left in 2015.
Am I right?
But they know that I don't have direct proof from that point on. I have indirect proof.
Am I right in saying, Emma, that there's actually a rule at the Human Rights Council that any country that wants information like that has to go ask the plenary, and that they have to ask in front of member states for permission? And China seems to be the only country, according to your information and your according to you, China is the only country that's violating that rule.
Yeah,
there doesn't. And am I right in saying also that the United Nations is under juridicum, it's or judiciary immunity of the United Nations, and so they basically have diplomatic immunity to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So can you, at what level court can you bring something like this to bear on somebody that's complicit, an organization that's complicit in the torture and the murder and the imprisonment of people who are going to and here in this country we know what it's like to fight, to try and fight oppression and things like that. If Ireland takes a seat there at the United Nations, at the head of the United Nations, then it bloody well needs to be aware of our own history. Yeah.
And I mean, to their credit, I know that the Irish delegation have gone and asked the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights about this, but the problem is they lie. So, I mean, they asked them in 2013 and they lied. Then they asked them again for several years. They kept lying. I kept giving them more and more written evidence. But it actually puts them in a very difficult diplomatic position because they're going into asking the High Commissioner for Human Rights, are you doing this? And she first of all says, no, we've never done it. Then she says, oh, we would never dream of doing such a thing, you know, Emma's lying. Then they go in with more evidence and they're like, hang on, we have the literal emails. Here is when you hand names to China. Like she's given us the list of all the names that she knows were handed over. are you saying this didn't happen? And they're like, oh, well, it might have happened a few times. And then they go, well, it was an old, and they try to basically kill the story. So they use words like historical practice. They claim that the fact that none of the NGOs complained to them somehow means it wasn't dangerous. Nobody knew their names were being handed over. They weren't told. So how are they supposed to know to complain? I don't think people immediately assume that the UN is going to sell them out to China.
According to the UN, one of their releases was that it's practice that countries, China and other countries, regularly ask for a list of the people that attend, and they weeks beforehand they either confirm or deny, and they always do so when they're sure that the person isn't in any harm.
That's not actually what it says. It's very carefully phrased. Let me explain why. I have a copy of it.
Yeah. It says,
until it is sure that there is no obvious security risk, is how that's phrased. And that was discussed a lot in my court case. The security risk that they are talking about is a security risk that the dissidents pose to the Chinese diplomats, not the other way around. That's the security risk.
It's very
very carefully phrased. There's also a bit where they say, until the accreditation process is formally underway. Well, all that means is we don't hand names to China until the people tell us they're coming. Well, kind of obvious, surely.
That's the same thing.
The decision to do this was taken at a time when nobody knew who was coming. So the email that I received on the 11th of February 2013 from my boss saying, I have decided that we're going to hand over these names. Nobody knew who was coming. The session was due to start, I think it started on March the 1st or March the 2nd that year. And 3 weeks beforehand, nobody knew who was coming. The person that dealt with accreditation started a week afterwards. So the decision that was taken was, this information will be given to China in order to avoid exacerbating Chinese mistrust against us. And my boss tried to justify that decision by saying that somehow this list, which is never published, was a public document. And that is still the UN's position. In court, that's the UN's position. My entire cross-examination on this issue was, is this document public or not? And the UN argues it is, and therefore that they cannot resist the request from China to hand over names. I made several points against that. It's never published anywhere. Same request from Turkey is refused. I've asked the UN in court to produce any evidence that any other country was done in its favor. They have not. And I have pointed out to the UN in court that their court position in an ongoing court case is that this is still happening.
Yeah.
And I said to them, well, in public, you keep claiming it's not. So what is your position? Are you lying in court or are you lying in public? And they have declined to respond.
We were talking there earlier on about Dulcan Issa. And, in an email on the 7th of September 2012, a Chinese diplomat at the UN requested from an NGO liaison officer names, and Dulcan Issa's name was given along with, I think if I remember, Beijing. And both their names were given. Yeah. And and he even thanked him, and dinners were arranged and everything, meals out for those.
And one interesting thing is that the way that the UN phrases the denial is very interesting. OHCHR, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, says we don't give names since 2015. The person who responded to that email in 2012 has now left OHCHR. Her new job is that she is responsible for all NGO accreditation for the entirety of Geneva. Maybe they're asking her directly, but China does still know who's coming because they're still sending not verbal, they're called. So there's kind of diplomatic communications to OHCHR where they know who's coming and they say, please don't accredit these people. So to believe that they're not still being given names, it basically requires a complete suspension of disbelief. So for some reason, they only care about Tibetan activists for the very sessions where they're coming. They don't care about them for the sessions where they're not coming. Same with the Uyghur activists, same with the Hong Kong activists. They always seem to know exactly who to ask about, and nothing in those communications has changed. But if the UN is saying, well, we stopped it, fine, have an investigation. Let there be an independent investigation. I've been calling for that since 2013. The UN has always resisted it. And if you're saying that they've stopped, if that's true, why would they resist investigation?
But you're saying that roughly 50 to 70 people who opposed the Chinese government were handed over. Yeah. And among them were 8 to 9 people with US citizenships and 5 to 6 people with German citizenship. Yeah. And that you've notified all these countries.
Yeah.
And what are they doing about it?
Well, that's the problem. What they do is they go and they ask the Human Rights Office, and the Human Rights Office
denies, and they accept it. So it's just...
I mean, it's a big circle, basically, where there isn't any freedom of information. So I've had to give the information to the member states. And it's quite interesting because the UN is now moving towards firing me. And I'm under investigation for wrongdoing. But the wrongdoing I am accused of is telling things to member states. There's no accusation at all that I've lied to any member states. It's the fact that I've told them that I'm under investigation for. So the fact of blowing the whistle. There's only been one time that this has been looked at by an independent court. And that was recently in the Netherlands. Because when OHCHR lies about me and lies about my reports, as you said, they have diplomatic immunity. I can't do anything about it. But when the Dutch foreign minister repeated those lies to the Dutch parliament, Dutch law applied. So I took the Dutch foreign minister to court, and he had to correct the parliamentary record. And the Dutch ambassador to the UN had to send a court-ordered tweet correcting the record. So I mean, that's just to give you an idea of, it's not complex. It's very easy for me to prove in a court of law that I'm telling the truth. The problem is that there is no court for me to do that. And within the UN, there's an employment tribunal. So I actually took the UN to the employment tribunal. So it's really unfortunate. And one of the things they kept accusing me of during the case was that I was clearly trying to litigate the fact of them handing me into China. And I was like, correct, well done. Because it's not about what's happening to me, it's about what's happening to these people's families.
Yeah.
But what the UN did there was, my cases were heard in June 2019. On the 10th of July 2019, after he had already drafted his judgments and the UN knew what those judgments were going to say, they fired the judge. They literally fired a judge without any allegation of misconduct to stop him from issuing judgments in my case. And I mean, that's extraordinary. That is not something that could possibly happen in a democracy. And yet, once again, because it's an employment tribunal, the UN is able to phrase all of this as some kind of employment grievance. I have no employment grievance with the UN. All of my performance evaluations have been excellent. I've never been accused of anything apart from blowing the whistle.
Do you mind me asking you what you feel about that phrase, whistleblower? I always find it, I always find that a more appropriate term would be somebody who is revealing a truth.
Yeah.
Whistleblower is almost like you're some kind of deviant. Because
yeah, I mean, I think it's, even if you look in the dictionary, it's kind of, all of the sort of synonyms for it are things like snitch and whatever else.
Snitch and
I was doing my job.
And scab and somebody that's passing.
I was doing my job.
Derogatory term for somebody who's actually looking after the welfare of their fellow human being.
Yeah.
And you have the evidence, as you say. What evidence do you have?
I have, well, as you've cited, I mean, I have emails in which names were handed to China. What I discovered basically after 2013 was that all of those email exchanges in 2013 about should we or shouldn't we do this after I'd objected, those were all for my benefit. This had already been happening since 2006. So I managed to get a few of the emails from 2012. So I have emails in which names are literally handed over to China. I have emails in which it's discussed. I have the responses from China for many years. obviously, I've been reporting this since 2013, so the UN has stopped copying me in the emails in which they directly hand names to China.
Yeah.
But I used to have access, it's been taken away since I started to speak more publicly. I used to have access to the central repository of communications to member states. So what I do have is the communications from China saying, don't accredit these individuals. So after they've been told who's coming, I have the next step where China writes back and says, don't accredit these people. And they always correctly guess. Now, the chances of that being the case for, I think it's 30 or so sessions of the Human Rights Council are very slim.
Yeah.
I found some other correspondence as well. It's not just been happening with the Human Rights Council, it's been happening with other expert mechanisms of the UN, which is almost even more concerning because a lot of those mechanisms will even meet with NGOs outside UN premises to avoid being seen who's giving them information. So it's incredibly concerning that China's also been getting names from them. I have tape recordings of the entirety of my legal cases in 2019 in which the UN says this is completely normal practice. The only problem is that I wouldn't listen to my superiors when they told me that this was fine.
So they're basically justifying, putting human beings in danger who have gone to the United Nations in the natural expectation of having a body or speaking in front of a body that's there to defend their rights.
Yeah.
They're justifying revealing those names because China is so big and so.
Yeah, they didn't want to, and I quote, exacerbate China's mistrust against us. That was the justification that was given in writing. There are various bodies in the UN to which I've appealed over time. I mean, the UN's quote unquote ethics office said that I should have known, as a human rights lawyer, I should have known that the fundamental principle of human rights law, which is do no harm, confidentiality, I should have known that all of those principles were meaningless in the face of even the possibility of a better political relationship with the Chinese delegation. I mean, it was shocking stuff.
So
and this is the person who's responsible for ethics.
Losing a few Uyghur Muslims who attend, putting a few Uyghur Muslims or Tibetans or Hong Kongers in danger is worth it.
Basically, yeah.
For the betterment of having a good relationship with China.
Yeah, and I mean,
life is expendable.
You know, it's stuff like when they say things in public, like this has never caused harm. You know, what happens immediately after that in private is that I re-forward them my emails where I point out, and, you know, I obviously can't name anyone who's without their permission. But I point out, for example, that one person whose name was handed to China and was not told that this had happened, later returned to China and died in a concentration camp.
That's right.
I point out that people reported that their family members were tortured in front of one another. Now, the fact that when that was reported by Amnesty International about Rebiya Kadir's children, she didn't know that this happened just after the UN had handed over her name. It also happened just after there'd been a US congressional visit. So the assumption that was made at the time was that it was due to that. It was punishment for that. Yeah. But given that she reported being told to stop her international advocacy and she was about to go to Geneva to attend the council, I think it's at least worth investigating, whether that could also have played a role. So, I mean, you can cross-check, because I have some of the dates where people's names were handed over, and you can cross-check with what happened immediately afterwards. So you can see things like the name of people from this NGO was handed over on this date. 2 days later, China's hacking all of their internal systems. Now that's sort of the least of it in a sense. You can cross-check and say, well, this person reported to this journalist on this date that their family was being tortured, and again, that they were being called. I mean, and it's horrific, think about it. One family member being tortured in front of another, forced to make an international call to someone who's planning to speak out against China's human rights abuses and say, don't do this, listen to what the police are doing to your son. I mean, it's horrific. And
I mean,
and basically says, well, we didn't get a complaint, so therefore our hands are clean. I mean, that is just immoral, unethical.
I don't understand how we haven't learned from the past war and the previous wars about concentration camps, about the dangers of trying to change people, put them into camps where they change their mindsets and they control mind control camps, and about the dangers of not allowing another person to speak freely about how they feel. And the dangers of complicity.
Oh yeah, I pointed out this is criminal complicity under international law. You know, it's one of the things the UN hired me because I'm an international lawyer that specializes in these areas.
But they wanted an international, clearly, from what you're saying, they wanted an international lawyer who would work for them and remain silent.
Yeah.
And do what and not have a conscience.
And I mean, the thing is that the way that they phrase it internally, it's very much, I mean, I always kind of hate doing the comparisons, but I think, you know, when you've got the largest set of concentration camps since the Nazis, I think you can start to look at why is it that people are so silent? You know, why is it that people aren't speaking out? Why is it that, you know, the UN is relatively silent on the issue and has been for years? And I think a lot of it is reduced down to these kind of, everyone feels responsible only for their tiny bureaucratic decision and nobody is looking at what the intended impact is. You know, I was the only person in those meetings bringing up, well, what on earth do you think China is going to use this information for? Like, what's the positive reason for giving this to them?
You wouldn't want to be, with all due respects, you wouldn't want to be a high powered lawyer or even brain surgeon to know that the reasons that people are asking for something is because it benefits them to know.
Yeah, exactly. And they would like these people not to come and not to speak. So they will take whatever necessary measures they feel they need to take to stop that happening. I mean, it's blatantly obvious why China was asking. And
Emma, of course, as a lawyer would feel, a human rights lawyer would feel that that was totally within your remit to release that information. I mean, that is your role as a lawyer, after all, is to defend the victim.
Exactly.
If you're a defense lawyer, or if you're a lawyer or anyone with a moral compass, that when you see an injustice being done, that you draw attention to it, because to not draw attention to it makes you complicit.
Exactly. And that's been the most difficult thing, is the fact that so many people went along with this. And even the ones that did not want to see. So I was bringing it up, you know, every time we have a staff meeting, all of those kinds of, anywhere where there were basically a lot of us gathered together internally, I would always bring it up. Nobody wanted to know. And that was really distressing to me, was that, you know, these are meant to be the people who, as you said, the UN Human Rights Office, I mean, it doesn't get a higher instance.
It doesn't get any higher. We all, everybody who has a grievance, their last resort is to go to the United Nations Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. And they think that that is going to be the nirvana of justice.
Yeah, I mean, it's the European Court in Strasbourg. Unfortunately, we don't yet have the UN one, but there's various different UN mechanisms. But it's like, yeah, it was just this thing of somehow internally, because I'm the person that found out and revealed this, there seems to be this idea that therefore it's only my responsibility to make sure it stops. And I kind of, well, there's like 1,300 people working in that office. Do none of the others feel any kind of moral responsibility to try to stop this? Because as I said, there is no dispute that I'm telling the truth. And
it can be simply rectified by just stopping the practice.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see some accountability for people that did it as well, but yeah, they need to stop, and they need to verifiably stop. Because another thing that is very interesting is that even when member states go and ask, even if they are told that it's somehow stopped, what they also get told is that it remains a decision to be taken by Eric Tistune, the man who decided to hand names to China in the first place, that it remains his unique responsibility to decide whether or not to do this.
Yeah.
Now, why on earth do we think he would have stopped? You know, I don't think he's an idiot. I think he probably does it orally now. I don't think he leaves a written trace, but China does still know who's coming. And his superiors are defending that even though there's a written rule that you brought up earlier, that they're meant to ask in public, they're saying it's his decision and only him. Now, how does one unelected bureaucrat get that power to break the rules set by member states?
But you know, I mean, there's a poem that I've looked at before, and it's called "First They Came for the Communists" by Martin Niemöller. And you know, it goes down along first the communists, and I did nothing because I wasn't a communist. And then they came for the socialists, and then the trade unionists and the Jews, and finally there was no one left for me.
Yeah.
Well, according to you, China has anyone that China is interested in knowing about, attending the event, China gets that information. Yeah. And for us to sit by, and for the UN to sit by and allow this practice to continue, in fact, to support this practice continuing and to be complicit in this, says to me that, you know, I mean, what happens when China comes knocking on Christians' doors, or comes knocking on any other nationality other than the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, or not just China, but any nation, if that's the practice, is to give people's names willy-nilly, aren't they supposed to come in and ask in front of all the member states for all of this information? So why are they being given that information? And why are the member states, including Ireland, why are the member states just sitting by and allowing that to happen? You've brought all this to the attention since 2013. You've been trying to, and you have the information. What, if anything, is our government doing?
Well, they seem to have stopped responding to my emails, unfortunately. I did have some meetings with the Irish delegation. As I said, it was the Irish delegation that told me about that meeting in 2013 where the UN just outright lied. They told me about another couple of meetings that they had with the UN outright lied. But the problem is that there is a tendency to believe people in power. So, I mean, when they meet with the High Commissioner directly, who has never met me, she has refused all my requests to meet. So the only person she's ever talked to about this, who has any knowledge of what happened, is the man who handed over the names. So what happens is that Eric Tistune writes her talking points and sits in the meeting. So the Irish government goes into this meeting. Eric Tistune has written the talking points. He's sitting right there. The High Commissioner says what he's handed her to say, and that's it. And I'm saying there needs to be an investigation. This cannot continue. Or, you know, if I'm lying, fine. I know I'm not, but let's have an independent investigation. Let's name 3 judges from wherever you want in the world who can come in, have access to all of the documents and evidence, and look at what has happened and stop it.
And what are the chances of that happening, given that they're almost omnipotent? They're all, you know, there's omnipotence about them, that nothing can be done apparently, because they have this judicial, I suppose, immunity.
Yeah, I mean, they're supposed to have, even under the UN's own policy. I was determined in July of 2020 to be a whistleblower. I mean, it took them a long time to get there, but they did eventually.
Oh, that was not an easy decision, though, Emma.
No.
I mean, you know, it's, you know, I could flippantly say it's the Irish in you, the fighting Irish. But there's a lot of Irish people. There's a lot of people in the world who would have information about things but don't want to rock the boat. What is it about you that said, no, I'm going to be a whistleblower? I really hate that phrase, by the way.
yeah, how could I not, in a way? You know, in a sense, I always feel the question's the other way around. I mean, how could I see something happening where people were going to get killed and not say anything? You know, there's this
It's a moral compass that you have, and
yeah,
and your sense of morality is stronger than any job.
Yeah.
Than any.
Exactly.
If you, I fully believe if you have your job on a higher status than another person's human rights and their life, then there's something wrong with your moral values.
I agree. So, I mean, for me, it wasn't a question of why did I, it's how could nobody else have said anything? Because, you know, I reported this as soon as I found out.
You're in an office with loads of people and they're all seeing exactly more or less what you're seeing.
Yeah.
What is this saying about them as people, that they're sitting by and allowing you to take, if you like, the full pressure of everything on your shoulders, because you're only one human being trying to help an entire group of Uyghur Muslims, Tibetans and Hong Kongers and others. God only knows, anyone that China wants to know about, or any country wants to know about, you know. I mean, if China can do it, then any country can do it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it basically, I think the internal culture is broken. There's this sort of thing where, you know, we do what the bosses say, otherwise we get into trouble. People can see how I'm treated and they don't want to be treated the same way. So they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to say anything. And I don't find that acceptable.
Don't they know that there's power in numbers?
Well, yeah, exactly. You know, I would have thought it would concern my colleagues. I'm deeply disappointed that it doesn't. I'm always advised by organizations that work with whistleblowers not to say that publicly, because they say, you know, people unfortunately always feel slightly judged by whistleblowers. And I'm sort of, it's been 8 years. I get to judge them a little for not speaking up. You know, even when I ask for minimal support.
My mom used to say, a guilty conscience needs no accuser.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and if you feel guilty, maybe you are guilty through silence.
Yeah, and I mean, lots of people will come up to me in corridors and sort of, you know, almost sidle up and say, hey, you know, you're really brave for what you're doing. And I'm like, well, that's nice, but that's not the point.
Why aren't you doing something?
Yeah, why isn't there any support? Even even the elected trade union, they said, oh, well, you know, it's difficult because the managers hate you, so it's very difficult for us to do anything. And I'm like, well, you're meant to be my trade.
That's what they're supposed to do. That's their modus operandi, is to help you.
Well, unfortunately, in the UN, being elected to the trade union is seen as a very swift way of getting a promotion and very little else. I mean, I honestly, it's been very difficult to realize how much people are willing to sort of prioritize their personal comfort over the mandate of the organization. And there has actually been a difference as well over those 8 years. When I first reported this, there were a lot of people who were shocked. They didn't know what was happening.
No, I was looking at your interview with Majid Nawaz on LBC, and I don't know if he was unprepared for you coming on or just thought that this is just some lawyer coming on, but he was absolutely horrified by the revelations, and rightly so. Every human being should be horrified by what you're saying. Yeah. Because it may be the Uyghur Muslims today and the Tibetans, as I say, and the Hong Kongers. Tomorrow it could be the Irish, or it could be anyone.
The other name that was handed over in 2012 that you mentioned, He Gang, her husband is Gao Shisheng. He's a lawyer that represented a lot of the persecuted Christian minorities. Yeah. She's in the Christian minority. She made it out to the US. At the time the UN handed over her name, his whereabouts were unknown. And he managed to smuggle out a book, and he describes his torture in incredible detail. And it's just, And I mean, he even has a moment in the book where he talks about one of the purposes of the torture, according to his torturers, being to stop his family speaking out. And he talks about being forced to tell them to stop speaking out. Now, for the UN to then say there's no link, well, how do you know? What might have precipitated a torture session where they're like, call someone and tell them not to speak out, given that they handed over her name at the relevant time? I mean, it's just this, and the credulity. The UN relies on the fact that they have a much bigger pulpit than any staff member who ever reports anything. They can speak to the masses. You know, I think what is telling, though, is that they don't respond to my allegations and I make them publicly. They never respond to me.
This is very interesting for me. I mean, you know that there's German Uyghurs, German citizens and American citizens on that list of people who have...
And Swiss and Swedish and Norwegian. And
you have notified all of those countries for the last 8 years. Mm-hmm. And you have shown your evidence now, and you have your evidence, your documentary evidence, written and oral. And what are people thinking now? Are they still believing the line that the UN? How could they possibly, when they see the actual physical handwritten evidence or typed evidence, how could they believe? How could they honestly believe?
I don't think they do, but I don't think they know what to do about it. I think there is a general impression that China will block any investigation. The investigation certainly won't come from the Human Rights Office itself, because it's been complicit in genocide. It still is. They have no desire to have anyone look at what they've been doing. So it would have to come from the Secretary General. I met with him directly. To his credit, he's the only UN senior manager that agreed to meet me. And we had a meeting in February last year in the diplomatic lounge of Geneva Airport as he left the Human Rights Council.
He took it very seriously, I can see.
Well, I think he took very seriously the fact that I was likely to get a lot more public because I was giving up on any possibility of internal change. I think that was his concern. Reputational damage rather than anything else, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah, no, of course. But no, I mean, I basically brought up the issue itself, and he basically said that he knew that I was telling the truth, that he knew that I had been subjected to years of harassment by the former High Commissioner, Prince Said of Jordan. And that because Prince Said of Jordan was at that time criticizing the Secretary General for his inaction on the Uyghur genocide, that it was going to be very difficult for Guterres himself to act in my case because the public perception would be that it was in response to the criticism leveled at him by Prince Said.
And explain to me about Prince Said. What level of harassment have you experienced from?
This, I just have to say one thing. There's a rule in the UN, which is a rule that they would very much like me to break, which is about airing grievances in public. So I can report wrongdoing in public, but airing grievances is more difficult. So I can say some of the things that were very clear violations. For example, his very first act out of office, once he left OHHR, was to tweet a defamatory tweet about me. He made it to 10 a.m. on his first day out of office. That's why I joined Twitter. Yeah,
I noticed your tweet that said I've been forced onto Twitter because of Prince Said.
Exactly. So he blocked me within a day. I'm waiting until when they fire me. I'm sure the rest of the UN will take great pleasure in blocking me too. But he had been awarded this prize in the Netherlands, and that's why I ended up being able to sue the Dutch government. For his work as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and he was going to get a pretty tulip and 100,000 euros. And I and another woman who had reported child sex abuse.
Tulip is probably appropriate.
The office sort of said, hang on. first of all, this is corruption of a UN official because we're not allowed to accept money for doing our UN jobs. I mean, it might sound nice when it's the Netherlands giving a prize to the High Commissioner, you know, substitute Saudi Arabia or China to see what's wrong with this picture.
Yeah.
So, you know, we said, well, hang on, this is very dodgy. And
irony isn't missed on me.
Yeah, so, you know, she wrote.
And Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, so I mean, she wrote.
Of democracy and humanity.
Exactly. But she wrote to the Netherlands and said, hang on, this man was found by an external panel to have done nothing about child sex abuse. And in fact, to have gone after the person who did try to do something with what the panel determined was a single-minded determination. And she brought up my case. I didn't actually write to the Dutch government. And they then sort of asked my employer, well, is any of this true? And of course they lied about me, repeated those lies in Parliament. And as I said, I was able to go to court and get those corrected. But he was obviously very upset because the Dutch government had realized that we were correct and they probably shouldn't give him 100,000 euros. So he'd obviously just been told that he wasn't getting this and he knew who to blame for that. So he sent out this sort of vicious tweet about me and Miranda Brown, the other whistleblower, and basically said that we were lying, that there was nothing to our claims. He also said that I had been promoted, and you know, which was certainly news to me. I've had no functions since then, so I'd very much like to know what was this promotion and why do I not have it. But I mean, it was just extraordinary though. And that's the thing that...
Your boss was promoted though, your boss that actually handed over...
Oh yeah, of course, and everyone else that did.
Sidelined.
Yeah, they've all been promoted.
That's not missed on me.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, the only person whose career is completely stalled is mine. And, you know, I've actually been going backwards, essentially. I've, you know, been forcibly transferred to a post that doesn't exist with the clear intention that, you know, oh dear, because of budget cuts because of COVID, my post will not exist in December, I'm sure.
There's always a shining light. You're in Geneva.
Yeah.
That has to be beautiful. Do you know?
It is lovely. I mean, I think it's, I would be more than happy to leave by now, I think.
Yeah.
But no, as I said, I mean, for me, it's just people are being endangered by an organization that has the mandate to protect them. This isn't a morally complex issue. This isn't anything like, you know, the UN has a tendency to try to make everything bureaucratic and complex and, you know, introduce more and more red tape, but this is just a simple moral issue. Should we or should we not put people in direct danger?
The comparison I can make is a child placing all its trust in its parent,
yeah, and
its parent revealing their innermost thoughts or their everything that they've said to them, everything they've done.
Yeah, I mean, it really is.
You do put your faith in this edifice, that is the United Nations, that is going to be your savior.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just the thing of, you know, the seeing what they actually say behind closed doors. You know, even with the press release you referred to earlier that they put out when this first went public. In court, the UN literally argues that it has a right to lie about its own policies if those policies becoming public could cause it reputational damage.
And could put their relationship with China in jeopardy.
Yeah. But it really is just, I mean, it's an extraordinary position to take. That the UN, which is funded by taxpayer money, says we have a right to lie to whoever we want at any time. They can't be held accountable for anything, which is, you know,
that's extraordinary.
It's taking our immunity a little far. I mean, it's meant to be functional immunity. So it's meant to be when we're fulfilling our functions. We can't be arrested.
What I was going to ask you, how important is it that, you know, organizations should not have immunity under any circumstance? You're a lawyer. Why give an organization immunity under any circumstances? Because when you do, you give them this sense of omnipotence. You give the, you know, you make the power hungry even more power hungry. Yeah. And to the extent that nothing can be challenged and they can do what they like.
It's like that sort of old quote, power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
But the thing is, for me as a lawyer, it's a misinterpretation of what the law actually says. And the UN is deliberately misinterpreting it and deliberately encouraging every world body to misinterpret it and every court in the world to misinterpret it. Because what it actually says is that we enjoy immunity in the exercise of our functions. So, I mean, that can be important, for example, if you have diplomats that are based in Russia and be arrested on trumped up charges, for example. It's important that that can't happen.
Absolutely.
But what it doesn't mean is that it should be abused. I mean, this diplomatic immunity has been cited when people have sexually abused children. Now, I'm sorry, there is no UN job that requires you to do that. And similarly, it's being abused here. It was against the rules for my boss to give these names to China. That wasn't part of his job.
No.
So he shouldn't have that immunity. Similarly, I have asked on numerous occasions for Antonio Guterres to lift the immunity of Stefan Dujarric so that I can sue him for defamation. Because if he's going to keep lying about me in press conferences, then I want him to be able to be held accountable for that. But he just kept lying. There was a case actually decided only today in the UN tribunal. And again, it was other people who blew the whistle on child sex abuse.
Yeah.
And the spokesperson that you mentioned earlier, Rupert Colville, sent emails, and I'm going to quote them. I apologize for the swearing, it was him, where he described them as shitty, dishonest, and duplicitous for having reported child sex abuse. He sent these emails with the intention that this information be used publicly. He sent them to journalists. And the court and the UN internally has decided that it's not going to even look at it. So they have absolute impunity. It's absolute and complete. There is no way of holding them responsible for anything. They know that they can go and lie about me. They can insult me to journalists to try to kill stories. They can lie about any staff member. They can, nobody seems to notice that they literally have 15 different stories about what happened. I have one. That doesn't seem to matter.
It hasn't changed since 2013, your one statement. But how difficult as a human rights lawyer must it be to work for the UN? Because one would think that when you become a human rights lawyer and you get a job with the United Nations, you're going to be there looking after the rights of human beings. When in actual fact, your real job, as I see it, and from what you say, is to look after the rights primarily and solely of the United Nations, the people within this, I keep calling it edifice, and all that they do, irrespective of how legal or illegal or morally bankrupt their actions are, that your job is there to defend them. So, I mean, do you feel that is what your role that you were hired to do? Did you know at the outset? Had you known at the outset, would you still have taken the job just so that you could find out information and help those that are in need?
I mean, it's sort of why I haven't resigned. People sometimes ask me about that, is that I don't want it to leave the UN entirely to the corrupt. I think a large part of the problem is something that's called the noble maire principle. And this is something from the foundation of the UN that basically says that if you work, they want to make the UN the most attractive employer, in a sense. And it says basically that we should have the highest salary of any civil service, that we should have the best benefits of any civil service. So, we're paid like US civil servants with the social benefits of Sweden. People can get basically free education for all of their children up till the age of 25. If they want to go to Harvard, it's fully paid by the UN. They get moving benefits, housing benefits. It is a very, very lucrative gig. I am very far down on the scale of sort of UN, and it is a very, very, very cushy life. And a lot of people do not want to risk that. And it's the problem, basically, is that people know that if they leave, they're not going to get those kinds of benefits anywhere else. They want to hang on to their job.
But in a sense, isn't that a form of, I suppose, bribery? You bring people in, you pay them astronomical amounts of money, and you put them in the moral dilemma of, I leave and I'll never earn this much money again, or I stay and I become complicit in all of this, or I stay and I work and I continue to be a whistleblower. But you must be curtailed.
Oh yeah.
Now that you don't you're almost sitting at home, probably getting paid, because they can't fire you because you've told lies, but you can't you're finding it, I presume, very difficult to source information about
I mean,
whether it's continuing.
that is difficult. I can say it was still continuing in September of last year. Now my access to anything where I would be able to see anything is completely cut. It was after the interview that you referred to with Majid Nawaz, and everything.
They must have taken that really. Majid.
I think that made him incredibly popular.
I think his head was about to explode.
There's something basically that the judge in my case, actually prior to them firing him without notice, and it's now been basically on hold for the last 2 years, but he basically took them to task for this because they were objecting to me having a Twitter account, and it actually came up in evidence. At that point I had tweeted a total of 15 times, and the UN was already upset by my Twitter account, so I'm sure they're very upset now. But he basically said, hang on, you're saying that you have a right to lie about her in a press release, that you sent it directly to the email addresses of 2 million people, including everyone that works in her domain. So you lied about her to all of these people, because there's no dispute about that. The last paragraph of that press release where they insult me is untrue. And it's also intended to discredit me, to discredit the source, therefore discredit what she says. But yet, if she corrects what you say about her publicly, you object. So, I mean, they believe that their impunity should be to such an extent that they can never be criticized. And they've actually introduced rules into the UN for staff about that, that you're not allowed to criticize the UN in public.
You're not allowed to
criticize the UN.
The UN.
So, I mean, this is, China has something similar, I believe. But it really is
honest to goodness.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
I'm almost now like doing Majid in this. I'm just. What is the difference? That is totalitarian.
Oh, firing a judge is totalitarian as well. Yeah, the basic.
I mean, there's no democracy in that. If you're a lawyer hired by the UN, a human rights lawyer hired by the UN, your job is to defend
the rule of law
in society, the people who are being persecuted, and to draw attention. But they're basically saying you cannot challenge the very people who are putting these people in harm's way.
Exactly. I mean, I wrote a book years ago. I wrote a book about torture, and one of the sort of fundamental principles with that level of harm is that you should ignore illegal orders. And I worked a lot on kind of, what is the psychology of how do you go about doing that in reality, so that someone that's in a very hierarchical system will ignore an order that is clearly illegal. And, then I'm sort of being told, well, we're going to hand these names to China. And I'm like, well, that's illegal. So, having spent my career to that point working on trying to get people to do the right thing in a corrupt system, of course I was going to do the right thing. It was almost like I kind of thought, had they read my CV? Did they know when they hired me? But I think it really is like you were saying, it is that level of impunity. It is a system in which, just in my case, and I'm sure there are others, the UN has fired a judge after he had written his judgments because they were aware of the content of those judgments, and replaced him with their preferred judge. Now, I'm sure that she will know what to do. They have rewritten 3 different UN-wide policies, including the policy on abuse of authority. Because the first judgment in my case, the only one they allowed that judge to issue said that the Secretary General himself had decided not to apply UN rules to me and had the former High Commissioner placed under investigation. They wanted to make sure that could never happen again. So of course, they get to name the investigators. So of course, nothing was ever going to happen. But they then changed the rules. So there's not even an obligation to do an investigation anymore. So you can break the rules, and it's only if a woman called Catherine Pollard decides that she wants to hold you accountable that there will be any investigation. They have changed the ethics office policies, because even their own ethics office said that the investigation of my case needed to be external. They didn't want there to be an investigation. So they referred it internally, and that happened in July, and I have no information of any investigation happening. They rewrite the rules.
But I mean, going back, say, to my own research, and you look at how World War II started because it was sanctioned at the very top. People did things because they used the phrase, and even afterwards at the trials, they all used the phrase, "I only did what I was ordered to do." And they abdicated total responsibility. Not all. There were many, as you say, who were able, and people like you who were able to say, well, an unjust law is worse than following a law. If it's unjust, don't follow it. And they were able to not follow that, follow the laws of Nazism. But this is exactly the same. You have a body such as the UN telling you that you can't challenge them on anything, that what they say goes, whether you like it or not, whether it's morally corrupt or whether it's putting people in danger. So what is the difference? I don't see any difference between what they're doing and what was done.
Oh, I mean, these are things that only happen in authoritarian regimes. These are not the actions of a body that considers itself subject to law. And I mean, what you're saying is exactly, what I was hired to work on, essentially. It's the distinction between rule of law, which is sort of an idea of justice, and positive law, which is whatever you legislate is fine. And we just do that now, no matter how unjust to minorities, no matter how unjust to individuals. And I mean, the UN finds itself in a very difficult position with me, because usually what they do when there's one of these disclosures is that they will basically abuse the person for years until they give up and go away. Yeah. Or they will abuse them for years until they accept a settlement and a non-disclosure agreement. I have refused all of that. So they are very much in a difficult position with me, because I have the evidence. I'm not going to go away. I don't think that they can possibly imagine that if they do fire me for the act of disclosing this, that it's going to be considered. And, what I am asking for is an independent investigation, that they stop doing this, that they tell everyone whose name was handed over when it was handed over, that they compensate those people for any damage that was done, that they try to help them to get their family members who were arrested or disappeared, to get information on them.
But is there any punishment that can be meted out to China? Is there any sanctions within the UN?
Well, the problem is that China's permanent member of the Security Council, and the Security Council approves sanctions. So, I mean, it's an issue.
I mean, can the other countries sanction them at all on anything?
There have been some Magnitsky sanctions in the last few days, and China has now retaliated by issuing its own sanctions, and sort of members of the European Parliament who have criticised them. And yeah, various researchers even. I mean, Adrian Zenz, who's done so much work to bring to light the abuses in the concentration camps, to bring to light particularly the isolation of the children when their parents are both detained, the
re-education programs, which is just really watching.
Oh, I mean, it's those camps the stories are coming out of sexual abuse, systematic rape, torture.
That's right, yeah. I was researching for this interview. I did know some about the Uyghur Muslims and about the Tibetans and Hong Kongers and that. But, you know, it was horrifying to hear the stories coming out of the camps of the systematic rapes and tortures.
And I mean, it's, you know, there's been a recent report as well, you know, it fulfills all of the criteria of the Genocide Convention. You only need one for it to be genocide, and it's got all of them. And it's just, you know, those camps started up in 2017, and you know, some of the first who were detained there were the family members of the people whose names were handed over. And I don't care how many times the UN tells me that there is no causal link. When people are speaking out publicly, China punishes their family members. There's no good reason to be telling them in advance who's planning to speak out. There just isn't one.
There is no, I mean, to a logical mind, there's none.
No.
But when you think that you have all power and that nobody is going to challenge you,
yeah,
then you feel you can do what you like.
Yeah.
And that
becomes
authoritarian and totalitarian, really.
Yeah. I mean, the UN's entire internal position relies on no senior manager ever meeting me, which they've been very effective at doing, with the exception of the Secretary General one time. But yeah, well, I mean, he actually wrote a letter saying that they needed to stop retaliating against me and needed to transfer me in 2018, and they still haven't. So, you know, the man seems to have no power within his own organisation.
What are you expecting, say, from the Irish government? What can
the Irish government can band together with the other major donors and insist on an investigation with people they name? That could be done tomorrow. That's what I want them to do. That's what I keep asking them to do.
Because I'm going to make sure that this email or this video gets to every member of the Irish government, and we'll see what we can do. But what are you asking our Irish government? What is of paramount importance to you and the persecuted Uyghurs?
Make funding conditional on an investigation happening, a genuine independent investigation. Like I said, 3 judges from, it could be, you know, an Irish judge could be amongst them. Ideally, it should be from several different countries to give it credibility. Appoint them and make OHHR comply with the terms of an investigation. The Irish government is one of many countries, along with basically all of the democracies and most of the countries where nationals' names were handed to China, that gives what are called unearmarked contributions to the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights. That means that the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights can spend money however it wants. The retaliation against me, including firing a judge, replacing them, the trumped up investigations currently happening into me, the faked investigations clearing the former High Commissioner of any involvement, have cost millions. When Irish taxpayers give money to the UN Human Rights Office, they probably don't anticipate that that money is going to be spent retaliating against an Irish employee who has dared to tell the truth. There needs to be an investigation. The Human Rights Office is not going to agree to that. China is not going to agree to that. The major donors need to make continued funding dependent on OHHR agreeing to stop this, investigate it, and hold the people who ordered it responsible. And that is not a lot to ask. I'm just asking that the Irish government basically applies its own policy.
Exactly. Well, Emma, it's just been extraordinary talking to you today. You're one seriously brave woman, and a lot of people would see what's going on and be reluctant to put their careers and put their financial comforts aside or even to put their reputation aside for the betterment of their fellow human beings, born in a different country, born of a different ethnicity or group, but part of the same humanity. And you're an incredibly brave woman. But I was looking at, and I think we'll kind of end with, I was looking at Michelle Bachelet's comment the other day on the And she said, I know how painful it can be to search for and find the truth. Victims and everyone in society have an inalienable right to truth, a right to see that justice is done. And she said that on March the 24th, 2021. And also Antonio Guterres, he said, without truth, there can be no justice and no progress. On this International Day for the Right to Truth about human rights abuses, we honour all victims and survivors, reaffirm their dignity and renew our commitment to justice and remedy for them. And that was also on the 24th of March. And I think that they should probably listen to their own words, don't you think?
I think so, and I think they should respond. I know that Tulkanisa, who we mentioned earlier, wrote to them both on that same day asking for an investigation. They should honour his dignity and give him that investigation.
Shindera Leishan Clár, that's the end of the show for today.
I will not murder the Irish language. I did learn it at school, but it's been a long time.
Well, listen, I'm not fluent either. My mother was. I'm ashamed that I'm not fluent at it, but Shindera Leishan Clár, that's the end of the show for today. Thank you to my lovely guest, Emma Reilly, human rights lawyer with the United Nations. Until the next time, Lacúnah Day, Bawallam Tugalir Chiacona, Sonis Agus Gro, Agus Gadeshiv Slán. Gadeshiv Slán.
Gadeshiv Slán.